Hi everyone, I'm Susan Mulvihill. Well, last week I was in a jacket, today I'm in a t-shirt, and that can mean only one thing. It's early fall in Spokane. Today I'd like to talk to you about different types of fall tasks you can do both in your vegetable garden and in your ornamental garden. But before we get started, if you're wondering what this lovely shrub is, this is a panicle hydrangea or hydrangea paniculata vanilla strawberry. It starts out with creamy vanilla colored flowers during the summer, and then as fall approaches it starts turning color into this beautiful kind of a dusty rose. I just love it. Now let's go look at roses and see what we can do this time of year. If you live in an area that has cold winters, you definitely don't want to prune your roses back anytime after about Labor Day. That's sort of the general rule of thumb. That's because pruning can encourage tender new growth that is very susceptible to winter kill, and you definitely don't want that. But if you're looking at your roses, whether they're climbing roses or all different types of roses, if you see any really long canes that are going to whip around in the winter winds, those ones need to be pruned back. That's because they can damage themselves, they can damage the plants around it, and they even make creepy scraping sounds on the windows during the winter, and I don't like that. So what I'm doing is I'm looking at my climbing roses. You can see how tall they are, and I'm going to go ahead and cut them back to roughly the height of the trellis or a little bit lower. This is part of my raspberry patch, and if you grew a variety this summer that produced berries during the summer, chances are they look kind of like this, maybe some yellow leaves, maybe a little bit of green leaves in there still too. But these canes that produced this year need to be cut down to the ground. I've read that it's a good idea to wait until the leaves have totally died, and that's because while they still have some green in them, they're still capturing energy and transmitting it down to the roots. And so the longer you can leave them in place, the better. But the important thing to remember is that you're only cutting back the canes that produced, and you can usually see the stems that the berries came off of. If you cut back new canes like this one down to the ground, you will not get any berries next year. So that's really important. But there is an exception to the rule. If you're growing a variety like Fall Gold, which produces berries during early summer and again in the fall, this is the exception. Since it's hard to tell if a cane is going to produce again the next year, I like to wait until early spring to see if there's any new growth coming out of them. If there is, I don't prune them back. But if there isn't any new growth, I cut them down to the ground. Another thing that you can do in the fall is to divide your perennials, any ones that are just too big for the space. Now these daylilies are looking a little sad, and that's because they've been frosted a few times, it's been a hot, dry summer, but they're still okay. However, I recently had to chop them back because they were covering this sprinkler, and they're doing that at different places in my bed. The great thing is, dividing perennials is not rocket science. It's not complicated. It's actually very easy to do. All you do is take a shovel and dig out a clump of them, divide the clump, and then either replant them in another area of your garden or give them to friends. That's always great. Now, if you want to divide your peonies, keep one thing in mind, and that is only divide them in the fall. Don't wait until the spring because they will not like that. Now in the vegetable garden, there are quite a few crops that will tolerate light frosts, and actually their flavor will be enhanced by the frost, which is great. But you need to get them out of the ground before it freezes solid, because once the ground freezes, it's a done deal and you cannot get them out. So examples of ones that will tolerate frosts include leeks and parsnips, carrots, Swiss chard and beets, and even celery. Wait until the foliage on your potato plants has completely frosted and died down before harvesting the potatoes. This is my winter squash and pumpkin patch, and as you can see by some of the brown leaves, it has already been nipped by a light frost. Now they can withstand light frosts, but they should be harvested before the temperatures get really cold. I'll be harvesting mine in about a week because I want to cure them for 2 weeks. Let's pick one and I'll show you what I mean. A few weeks ago I shot a video about knowing the best time to harvest different types of vegetable crops. In the case of winter squash and pumpkins, there's 2 things you need to look at. The first thing is you want to do a thumbnail test, and that's where you press in hard on the skin. If it cuts through easily, that means it's not mature. You want to just leave it alone and let it keep growing. In this case though, it didn't cut through the skin at all, so that tells me it's mature. But the other thing I look at is the stem. It should be a nice golden color and not green. Now when I cut it off of the vine, I want to leave a couple of inches of stem. The reason I want to leave a stem on is if I didn't, that's an area that is opened up to molding, and that's not good. So if I leave a couple of inches of stem on, that resolves the problem. Now while you're harvesting, if you accidentally knock this stem off, that's okay. Just remember to use that squash first. Now let me show you what I do next. The next step, which is so important, is curing your winter squash and pumpkins for 2 weeks. So what does curing mean, and why do you want to go to the trouble? Well, I'll tell you what, if you cure them, they will last so much longer in storage so that you can enjoy them for many, many months. It's definitely worth it. And actually, it's not all that much trouble anyway. So for curing, all you do is you move your winter squash and pumpkins to an area that is light, warm, and protected from the weather. So in my case, I'm using my empty, unheated greenhouse. And you put them there for 2 weeks, and they're going to harden off. And then you move them to an area to store them for the fall and winter months. In my case, again, I'm using our basement where it's nice and dark. It's a little bit on the cool side, and they store really great. In my October 1st garden column, I mentioned how it's my final column of the 2017 growing season. But don't be alarmed, I always write from February to October, so this is normal. But there's still plenty of gardening to talk about, isn't there? Fortunately, I post to my Facebook page every single day, and you can find it at facebook.com/susansinthegarden. I also have a blog on my website, and that is susansinthegarden.com. And last but not least, I'll still be shooting videos, right? You can find my YouTube channel at youtube.com/c/susansinthegarden. Enjoy this beautiful time of year.